Well, good afternoon, and we apologize for the technical difficulties we've had with this session and for our late start. We're going to go ahead and start over with our webcast today. We do want to thank you for your patience and for joining us today. We are excited about this session today on driver safety with David Bradley from VFIS. Good afternoon, David. How are you doing?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Great. Well, we'll go ahead and get started again. Before we do move on, just a few things to cover. A copy of today's recording will be available later at fernoems.com if you follow the link for webcasting. You can also go to YouTube and search Ferno EMS and you'll find the video there as well. Also, as we go through the session, if you have questions, you'll find a chat feature in the lower right-hand portion of your screen. Feel free to send your questions in and we'll answer them in the order that they were received when we get to the end of our session. So, David, as we get started here, I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about yourself and about VFIS.
I would be glad to. Like you said, my name's Dave Bradley. I work for VFIS in an education and training role, which is kind of an odd and unique role. I have no insurance background, but I work for an insurance company. VFIS was started in 1969 with the goal of targeting and creating the first comprehensive insurance package for emergency service organizations. We currently insure about 16,000 fire and EMS departments in the U.S. and Canada, and we train in the area of about 16,000 responders a year in over 400 classes in that area.
Great. So you guys really have a lot of experience in delivering these programs.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, we're really excited about today's session on driver safety, and David, maybe you could go ahead and take us into that and explain to us what that's all about.
I certainly will. We'll spend the next several minutes talking about comprehensive driver training program. And what you should see on your computer now, or if you're into the program, is a program overview that essentially looks at, we're going to start with perspective and work our way down through the different bullets that you can see in front of you to really identify and outline what comprehensive driver training is. Let's talk about perspective. As you see in that first bullet, and no one is going to disagree with this, staff are absolutely the most important asset of any emergency service organization. Whether you're volunteer, combination department, career department, staff are absolutely number one. Emergency vehicles, our apparatus, our ambulances are absolutely an important asset also. We know there's a large percentage of injuries and deaths related to vehicle operations. On the EMS side, we don't have rock-solid numbers of how many EMS responders die in the line of duty, but we know it's a large percentage. The fire side, we know 25% of firefighter line-of-duty deaths are vehicle-related. That brings us to the point of, with the injuries and deaths, how important it is to evaluate the safe operations of our vehicles, particularly during that emergency response. We want to make sure that we've got well-trained, well-educated drivers that are taking care of our vehicles. So it's incumbent upon the organization to select and utilize the absolute best people to be taking care of our number one asset. As we go to the next slide, leadership perspective on safe emergency vehicle operations. This is truly a hallmark slide. Leadership needs to incorporate the best practices for the industry and put them into their SOPs, their SOGs, their education, their training, teach to them, train to them, implement them, and enforce them so we know we've got the best things going for the people that are driving our vehicles and for the citizens we take care of. VFIS offers resources on all aspects of emergency vehicle operations, and we'll be talking about several of those as we go through the program. As we look at resources on your next slide, the VFIS risk communique comes up. VFIS risk communiques are forms that we develop based on a large risk area or a serious risk area, and what it essentially does is identifies what that risk is and then gives you guidelines or parameters to address that risk, whether they be in training or policy or procedure statements or things like that. It gives you a guideline on how to address that risk. All of those things that we talk about, and you'll see this on many slides, all of those things are available at VFIS. From a risk control standpoint, you can go to that website and visit or download any of those areas. As we go to the next slide on standard operating guidelines, this is contained within the driver-operator requirements risk communique. So we've got good, sound emergency vehicle response guidelines. Those guidelines, as you can see on the list, as you can see on the PowerPoint, it's not all inclusive, but we've got intersections, response speeds, driver and officer responsibilities. Think about backing. Do you have a spotter program? Warning devices, private vehicle response. Having policies and procedures, standard operating guidelines to address those areas gives you a rule book by which to teach on the driver training, teach your operators, let them know about what the policies and procedures are. As we go into driver selection, again, a few slides ago, you saw we talked about both driver selection risk communiques and driver operator requirements. The driver selection considerations, age. Age is one of those things people take for granted and say, well, you know, do we really need an age parameter? We recommend from a VFIS standpoint that folks are not under the age of 18 years. We want them to have some driving experience before they're operating your emergency vehicles. Then on the other side of it, the CDL requirements, the federal DOT regulations, typically they don't allow, they prohibit folks under 18 from driving a 26,001 pound gross vehicular weight vehicle. Health is another area on that slide. Important that your driver, operators, emergency vehicle operators, you know they're healthy enough to operate the emergency vehicle. So having a good job description that they take along with for a medical evaluation or a physical, and the physician evaluating them says, yes, based on this job description and how they're presenting from a medical health standpoint, they are capable of driving that emergency vehicle. Your next slide, driver selection considerations. Kind of an important point here. Your youthful or inexperienced drivers of any age, your new drivers, 19, 20, 21, should not be frontline drivers until they've got the experience with the emergency vehicle, they've got the maturity, they've had the training. That also goes for folks who are inexperienced. You may have somebody join your service at 25, 35, 45, 55 years of age. Make sure prior to saying, yes, you're a frontline driver, you can drive emergency, that they are trained and educated and understand the risks and the best practices associated with driving. As we go farther into driver selection, motor vehicle reports. A lot of people, again, take these for granted. I know the local police. I'll know if somebody's done something wrong with their vehicle. Not always. A best practice recommendation from VFIS is that your motor vehicle reports or MVRs are reviewed annually. That you check the drivers that are driving your emergency vehicles, and you'll also notice it's for personal operated vehicles also. You want to know what that personal operated vehicle, what that POV, what that person's doing when they're operating that vehicle. Even if they're not operating it at the time for an emergency response, it's important to understand how they drive that vehicle. We'll talk a little bit more about how to evaluate motor vehicle reports in a minute. Additionally, annually, you need to know the person has a valid driver's license. It sounds simple, it sounds silly, but having them produce a copy of their driver's license every single year validates that they have an official, appropriate driver's license for that state. And then the last bullet on that slide, the personal vehicle driver needs to show their deck page or that they have vehicle insurance on their personal vehicle. The next slide talks about the motor vehicle report. It is absolutely imperative you have an evaluation criteria. The risk communique on driver selection from VFIS gives you some of this criteria. And we look at evaluating that area and saying, having a criteria that says, okay, this person's had a moving violation versus this person has had a DUI. How do we treat those individually? How do we treat those? What do we do? How do we evaluate those? So it's important to have an evaluation process as part of the MVR process. Leaving driver selection and moving on to initial driver education and training. This is the initial driver education and training. You've got that new person, either new to your service or new to driving. You want to make sure they understand how to drive that vehicle, what all the ramifications are, what the educational components are. So the next couple slides are based on the VFIS Emergency Vehicle Driver Training Program. We call it EVDT. Lots of folks call it EVOC. Your next slide gives you an overview, initial emergency vehicle driver training. We're going to look at each one of these areas, but they need to be sitting in the classroom. Then they need to be operating the vehicle on a closed course, and then they need to take the vehicle over the road, over street and highway driving. So as we look at classroom instruction, we want them in the classroom for 6 contact hours. That means you schedule a full day, and with breaks and lunch, you've actually talked to them for 6 hours. You've introduced all the concepts related to your organization's idea of what safe driving is. And there's a laundry list in front of you. You start with an introduction and the issues of what are our injury rates, what are our fatality rates, where are some of the areas that cause the greatest concern. What about the driver? Great place for you to talk about your driver selection process, how they stay a driver, what they need to do annually from a training standpoint. Chance for you to talk about your specific SOPs and SOGs related to your organization. What vehicles, how they're driven, what response parameters, all the different things that we outline as we go through this program. The legal aspects, you have to talk about your state law. What are the privileges that your state law gives you? Additionally, what does due regard mean? Making sure that comment or that phrase comes into the conversation under legal aspects. You talk about the vehicle, taking pictures of your own vehicles. Put up weights. How much do they weigh? How tall are they? What are the different parameters of these vehicles? How long are they? Things like that. Emergency vehicle operations. Talking about the areas we talked about earlier from a policy and procedure standpoint. Intersection navigation. Preventing rollovers. How do we safely back the vehicles? How do we respond in our personal vehicles? Things like that. And then going over inspections and maintenance. What do we do to the vehicle prior to response? What do we do at shift change? If we're a volunteer organization, how often is somebody coming in? Is it daily? Is it weekly? To check our vehicles. And then at the end of that class, they take a written test. Successful completion of that written test allows them, that means they understand the material and now they can process that material. Now it's time to take them out and let them have hands-on with the vehicle on a closed course. Closed course, cones where they're not going to damage anything, they're not going to hit light poles, they're not going to hit other vehicles, where they get used to how the vehicle handles. So specific vehicle, if you expect somebody who's been driving a VW Passat, a Ford Fusion, whatever, to now drive a 12,000-pound ambulance or a 40 or 50,000-pound engine or an 80,000-pound ladder, you need to train them to that vehicle. It's got to be task evaluation specifically to the vehicle. They need to successfully complete that. We give you a resource on the next slide. We have a competency course resource from VFIS. That is the course layout and additionally the course score sheet. 8 different sections of the course, and they're graded and evaluated on each section of the course. They successfully complete the competency course. We now let them go over the road. And you as an instructor, you as leadership, you as an organization have to be comfortable that this person is now capable of taking the vehicle over the road, but not by themselves. We want somebody to go with them, a trainer from the organization, somebody in leadership who knows the parameters, knows the policies and procedures, and we recommend 10 hours of behind-the-wheel time. If you have different vehicles, several hours in each of those vehicles to get them comfortable with how those vehicles handle. Train to your area. If you have bad intersections, curves in roads, unguarded railroad crossings, low bridges, things like that, take them through those areas so they're comfortable. At the same time, they're getting used to your area while they're getting used to the vehicle. And they need to successfully complete that area also. And we give you another resource on the next slide. On the VFIS website again is the Street Highway Evaluation Form. It's a multi-page form that evaluates them based on emergency response, standard driving, and driver training. It gives you so many right turns, so many left turns, so many intersections negotiated, passing, those kind of things. It gives you all the aspects. And it does not have to always be done just in an emergency fashion. You can do the driving evaluation during normal flow of traffic, but it's important to evaluate them and have a process for evaluating them. So we finished with the initial. We've got them in the classroom. We've now got them to the competency course. We've now got them over the road. It's not the end of the line. We now need to annually train them in classroom. So get them in the classroom for an annual refresher training on driver training. Does not have to repeat EVOC every single year or REVDT program. Think about what your department does. What does your organization do? Talk about legal aspects. Talk about the physical dynamics of the vehicle. Review your policies. A great time to remind people about what our policies are. Look at the national issues. What are the things affecting us nationally? As we know, intersections, rollovers, personal vehicle, highway safety, all those things are great refresher trainings to bring people back. You can focus on what your losses have been. Where are our losses? How can we prevent those? As you flip to the next slide, we have several resources for you for these functional areas, for these refresher trainings. The VFIS Safety and Risk Series are 17 to 20-minute videos that have a facilitator pack that teaches the facilitator, hey, here's the key points of this. Here's when you want to stop and talk about these key points. There's a section for you to talk about your policies and procedures, but there's a 17-minute video in there, 17 to 20-minute video, that gives you the key points of the risks and the key successful best practice strategies to make sure we're negotiating these areas appropriately. We do classroom refresher. We also need to do behind the wheel refresher. Again, this is very much a department or organizational level decision. We recommend it's not done less than every 3 years. Some of the parameters that you can consider this are on your PowerPoint. What's their actual emergency vehicle driver time? Do I track how often they're driving that emergency vehicle in an emergency fashion? Have I observed their proficiency? Have they driven once this year in snow, or have they never driven in snow in the 5 years they've been with the organization, or never driven on dirt roads? Make sure you train to the environment. How many years of driving have they had? What infractions do they have? What's their overall experience at the organization? If you've got new vehicles or new technology, it's important to include those. This isn't one of those absolutely black and white areas, but it's important to at least assure that people are competent behind the wheel on a regular basis. As we move on, we look at preventative maintenance. It is part of driver training. We want our drivers to understand that, hey, the regular inspection of an emergency vehicle is an essential step to keep that a safe response. It's going to be important to know how to check that vehicle, what needs to be done from a preventative standpoint, and what are the rules and responsibilities for that driver in the inspection of that vehicle and the preventative maintenance program. Again, one more slide, we give you a resource for that. We have a vehicle preventative maintenance risk communique that will guide you through some of those strategies. And as we get close to finishing this section of our presentation, incident investigation. There's a lot of language in front of you on the slide, but really what it comes down to is, where are our losses? Where are our near misses? What is the root cause that is attributed to them? Not, well, it happened because somebody did this, but what was the root cause? Were they not trained appropriately? Do we not have proper policies and procedures? What's the root cause that's causing these areas, and what corrective actions can be taken? So incident investigation plays a key part in reducing emergency vehicle collisions and losses related to them, including our injuries and our line of duty deaths. And a resource on the next slide, there is a VFIS accident investigation guidebook that is on the VFIS website that can be downloaded that gives you a guideline for how to conduct an investigation. So as we wrap this section up, you look at your slide, there's a program overview slide that says, we started with perspective. We got the perspective of where we were. We talked a little bit about leadership. We talked about SOPs. We looked at driver selection pretty intently. How do we need to make sure we're selecting the right people? Then how do we train them? We looked at preventative maintenance, and we looked at accident investigation. So we began at the beginning with perspective, and we ended with, here's the soup to nuts approach to make sure we've got the proper person.
Dave, thanks for that really great presentation and really powerful information. And it's really not just about risk, but it's about keeping our staff safe and making it so everybody can go home at the end of the day.
Absolutely.
Well, we want to open it up to questions now to you in the audience. Again, you can use the chat feature in the lower right-hand portion of your screen to send questions in. Dave, I see we've already got some questions that have come in. Robert has our first question. Dave, what are you evaluating the motor vehicle report for?
Really good question, Robert, and thanks for that. We're looking at the motor vehicle report, and actually VFIS isn't looking at it. We're asking organizations to look at the motor vehicle report and where are the issues. They should have a policy, or they should have a guideline, a evaluation parameter that says, okay, here's moving violations. How many moving violations has a person had? Speeding tickets, things like that in the course of a year or 18 months. And have they had any of the big ones? DUI, leaving the scene of an accident, reckless driving, driving without insurance. Having parameters. Most of those big ones, they consider them Class A in many states. The state actually suspends your license. VFIS actually recommends that they're suspended from emergency vehicle operations for at least 18 months until they follow certain parameters. So you're looking, and the reason you want to have a standard is you want to evaluate everybody's the same, but you want to make sure that you're evaluating them and you're not caught in the dark with, wow, this person had 4 or 5 moving violations, and you don't find out till they're in a vehicle collision. You want to make sure you know the kind of people that are driving your vehicles.
Definitely, definitely. Well, our next question here is from Julie. Julie's asking, how do you approach a volunteer driver who is 65 and needs to stop driving?
And I'm smiling because we get this comment or question all the time, and it is one of those questions you tread lightly on. It's easy to assign a lower age limit. Assigning an upper age limit, typically what we do, VFIS does not say, okay, at this age, you can't drive anymore. What we recommend is a medical evaluation for folks to say, here's the job description for a driver. Can they physically and medically mentally drive the vehicle? We don't set an age limit. We let it go with what is the physician
It's
say.
more based on an objective standard more than anything.
Yes.
Great. We have another question here from Tom. Are there tools that can help monitor driver behavior? And Dave, maybe I'll take this one for a minute. There are a number of tools and systems out there that will help you monitor driver behavior. One of them is offered by Ferno. It's called the Acetech system. It includes a module called the AVI, or Vehicle Informatics module. It includes an accelerometer, GPS, and it ties into the CAN bus system of the vehicle so that with real-time reports and real-time monitoring, you can actually see if a driver is speeding, if they're taking their turns too hard, if they're accelerating or decelerating rapidly. And you can use those reports, again, either live or in a historical fashion to go to that driver and talk to them about their behavior and how they can change their driving habits and skills and do a better job. So those systems are definitely out there. I don't know if you have anything to add, Dave.
There are many systems out there, video systems, vehicle monitoring systems. As you mentioned, Ferno has one. What we like to definitely talk about is all those systems are tools. You still want to make sure you use those tools effectively. Take preemption system at an intersection. You can't just put preemption system in and assume that everybody's going to drive safely and get through the intersection. You still need to do good intersection training because there's still right turns on red, people not paying attention and things like that. So every single monitoring system, whether it's video, whether it's vehicle monitoring, whether it's the Ferno Acetech, is absolutely a tool that leadership needs to use to make sure you've got good drivers.
And I think something implied there too is it's really not about punitive measures. It's about modifying behavior and working with your staff to make them better at what they do.
Absolutely.
Great. We've got another question here from Rick. Dave, Rick is asking, how many times should a person go through the competency course?
Rick, good question. The initial competency course, typically we recommend at least twice. If they're going through the course without any challenges, 2 times is a good barrier or a good barometer. Kind of like if you look at the EMS side, taking one set of vital signs doesn't tell you anything about your patient except that they have vital signs. You need something to compare it to. So at least twice through the competency course, especially for initial training. If they're having challenges, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times, making sure that they're comfortable with the vehicle. Because the competency course teaches you the parameters of the vehicle. How do I back? How do I use mirrors? Where's the corner of my vehicle? What hangs off? How does this vehicle turn? Really important that they get comfortable in a closed course before you send them over the road.
Right. And it looks like there's another question that relates to that. What is a passing score for the competency course?
Good question. Passing score for the competency course from a VFIS best practice is that they successfully complete the course without any penalty points. That's pretty straightforward.
It's pretty simple.
We want them to get through the course without parking outside the bounds, without hitting cones, without crossing lines. Successful completion is successfully completing it without penalty points.
Great. Well, that's all the questions we're going to take at this time. If we did not get to your question, please feel free to go ahead and send that in, and we will answer it within 24 hours, either myself or Dave here. We want to thank you for your time today. Again, we do apologize for some of the technical difficulties. A copy of the video will be available at fernoems.com. If you click on the link to webcasts, you'll find it there. You can also go to YouTube, search Ferno EMS. You'll find it there. Some of you are probably wondering if this PowerPoint is available. We will be sending out an email with that PowerPoint, so you'll have access to that. If you have any questions of Dave or the VFIS team, you can go to VFIS.com, or you can call them at 1-800-233-1957. You can also get information on Ferno, all of our products, including the Acetech system, at fernoems.com. The Acetech system is specifically at fernoacetech.com, and you can call our customer service at 877-733-0911. We'd like to thank you for your time and hope you have a great afternoon.